Hi guys, welcome to the channel. My name is Matt Garvey and we are here to talk about making comics today. And in today's video, we are going to be talking about the curse of the second issue. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, when I first started making comics, it did not even register with me that not everyone that buys your first issue is automatically going to buy your second, third, fourth, and so forth issues. And that seems pretty obvious, but when you're first starting making comics, sometimes you don't realize, you can't see the wood for the trees. And I think this is really, really important, especially when it comes to printing comics. We've been talking about how many copies of your comic you need to print, that kind of thing, over the last couple of weeks. And this is something that we need to take into account when we are planning, putting our business hats on and looking at how many copies of each comic that we need to print, for comic cons and shops and selling face to face, that kind of thing. This isn't really applied to people that are doing Kickstarters, because if you're doing a Kickstarter is pretty much a pre-ordering service anyway, so you know how many issues of your comic to print. But this is some people that are going to be going to comic cons in the next 6-12 months, 2 years time, whatever. Now, I learned this the hard way, and I'm going to explain what happened to me. This is my big dumb face at my very, very first Comic Con in May 2016. So this is me, first time ever behind a Comic Con table, setting up, getting my books ready, to sell for the next day. Okay, now how it worked in my head, when I wanted to do my first Comic Con, I wanted to have at least 2 books ready. And the reason for this is because, at that time I had 2 books. I had my steampunk murder mystery, Cordelia Swift, and I had my inappropriate toilet humour, Chunks. Now, my logic behind this was, I'm trying to appeal to as many people as I possibly can that are potentially going to come to my table, and not everyone's going to want inappropriate toilet humour, and not everyone's going to want steampunk murder mystery. So if I've got 2 different genres and 2 different types of books, I'm doubling my chances of potentially getting sales. So that was my logic behind it. Now, I was very fortunate to have 2 issues of both those comics ready for the Comic Con. It just worked out that way that, they came up very, very quickly after the first issue. So I had 4 books on my table. Now, we are going to be going through Comic Cons and how to sell at Comic Cons and what you need for Comic Cons, that kind of thing, in the next few weeks. So make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring that bell so you don't miss out on those videos. But what I realized is, not everyone that bought the first issues of these books bought the second issues of this book. So my first comics were released in February, March of that year, and I did 100 copies of Chunks and 100 copies of the first issue of Cordelia Swift, and they both sold out. Really, really happy. And with the Comic Con coming up, I had the second issues ready. So I did 100 copies of issue 1 of both the books and another 100 copies of issue 2 of both those books. Now, the problem is if you've got issue 1 and issue 2 there, not everyone that buys issue 1 is going to buy issue 2. So what it leaves you with is, it's going to leave you with an odd number of issue 2s that you now can't sell because you don't have enough issue 1s to add on to it. So it just goes down in a really weird way. So every time someone comes to your table and they buy issue 1 and you look blankly because they don't pick up issue 2, and you're like, oh crap, that's an issue that I can't sell. Now, I'm not saying that you will never ever get rid of those issue 2s, because as you do reprints and do more Comic Cons, you'll print more of issue 1, but we need to work out to allow for printing less of issue 2s when you go to Comic Cons or doing your print runs. Okay, so how this works is, and this is the same across the entire comic book industry, whether you are, watching this channel for the first time and you're putting out your first comic, or a Marvel and DC as well. This happens across the entire industry. Now, the first issue of a series will always sell more than the follow-up issues. And the reason for that is that first lot of sales is going to be made up of what I like to think of as 3 people. Now, the 3 people you've got is, first lot is going to be your core audience. Now, if you're starting out, you may not have a massive core audience, but we're going to talk about growing that in this video and other videos. But, for example, let's talk about Marvel now. I love Daredevil. It's my favorite character. Now, I'm Daredevil's core audience. I will buy that book regardless of who's writing it or who's drawing it. I will always buy that book. Okay, so I'm part of that audience. Now, as well as that, there are creators whose work that I enjoy. People like Jeff Lemire and stuff like that. I will always buy their books because I enjoy their work. I know that I'm going to get, X amount of quality in there, so I'll always buy. So I'm in that core audience. So whenever that book comes out, I'm going to buy it. But as well as that, you're going to have new audiences, and that's made up of 2 people. Now, for a first issue, you're going to have the speculators. Now, these are people that are going to be buying that first issue because they think it's going to be worth money down the line. Always happens, again, at every stage of, comic making. People are going to buy that first issue, bag it, board it, slab it, whatever they do, just because they think it's going to be worth money. Now, also, you are going to have new readers. Now, these new readers are the people that we are targeting because we want to convert them into becoming our core audience, because that's how you grow your audience. Now, what you need to understand is not everyone that buys that book, not every new audience member is going to buy those subsequent issues, because the book might not have been for them. They just may not have enjoyed it. They just thought, you know what, weren't for me. I'm not going to buy anymore. Don't take it personally. This is what happens. It happens across the entire comic book industry. So what you'll find is, now last week I gave the example of, if you're putting out your first comic, to not overextend and put out 100 issues. Again, that's how I started. But if I was going back and giving myself advice on my very first Comic-Con, this is what I would do again. So for Cordelia Swift, I would probably have printed 100 copies of that first issue. Now, if I could go back and give myself advice, I would say to myself, do you know what, for issue 2, I would probably print between 20 and 30% less to allow for that drop off. And I would have sold out of both of them if I did that. But I was left with issue 2s that I couldn't sell because I didn't have enough issue 1s to sell with it as they went down slower. But the great thing is, obviously, with independent comics like ours, is we can print when we want. So we can always top up those first issues to allow for that slower selling of the second issue. But our goal is to not overextend ourselves, not spend all our money on stock that we can't sell until the next Comic-Con, because you want to invest that money in making more comics. So what I would potentially do, again, going back to Matt 6 years ago, is Matt, issue 1, do 100. Issue 2, do 80. Then for the follow-up issues, 3, 4, and so on, I would decrease that by about 10% each time. And because, again, some people get bored of a series, they're going to drop off. It wasn't for them. They gave it a couple and, they just decided, not to get the subsequent issues. But that's your first title. And now this is the important bit. And this is, the brutal honesty. It's going to take you time to grow that core audience. So once you've put out your first book, you're going to be, putting out other books, hopefully, as well. Hopefully you do that. So you're going to have more titles that you're going to be putting it. So, but what you'll find is when you release your next book, because you converted some of them new readers into your core audience, you're actually going to sell more issues of that first issue. And there's going to be more new readers and more speculators that are going to buy that first issue. But again, you need to allow for that drop for the follow-up issues again. And then as time continues, you're going to put out, hopefully, your third series. And then I did the example a couple of weeks ago where I printed 200 copies of Big Worms, because I know comfortably that I can sell 200 copies. But I know for those follow-up issues, I need to allow for dropping those numbers, because everyone that buys issue 1 is not going to buy issues 2, 3, 4, and so on. So this was the point of the video. This is what you need to get into your heads is, again, not everyone that buys your first issue is going to buy your second issue. Don't overextend yourself by doing massive print runs, because you're going to be stuck with stock. So hopefully that's helped. Hopefully you found that interesting. I will see you in the next one. And remember, if I can make comics, anyone can.